The title of the sermon this week is What's My Mission? It's part of our Made for Mission series, week 2. Last week we learned that every person is called by God for mission. You are not an accident. You are God's masterpiece, created for a purpose. Some people actively pursue the mission God made for them and that they were made for. They find it because God's not hiding it from them. He's more excited than we are in seeing us use our gifts and live out the reasons He made us in the first place. The big point last week was we are all called. It's not just for a select few, but for all Jesus followers. If that's the case, then the obvious next question should be, so what am I called to do? What is my mission? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Luke 9:51 says, as the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. Jesus was a man on a mission. He resolutely means purposeful, determined, and unwavering. He set out to lay his own life down with great intentionality and courage. He knew where he was going, and his life was bigger than himself. Earlier in the chapter, he shared point blank what following him meant. Luke 9:23 says, then he said to them, all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. This is before the cross. I'm sure some there thought, what cross? Well, Jesus made it clear the mission of those who follow him was the same as his. Followers must lay down their lives on a daily basis for the sake of others being saved. This isn't just a one-time event. This is the mission of our lives on a daily basis from now till Jesus returns. Our mission is way bigger than ourselves or even the people we serve. It's part of a 2,000-year plus worldwide movement Jesus started. I think one of Satan's most powerful tools to get Jesus' followers off mission is the weapon of distraction. If you have a cell phone, take a look at it. Pull it out for a moment. On average, Americans check their phones 345 times a day. And 74% of people in America feel uneasy leaving their phones at home. More than 61% have texted someone who is in the same room as they are. It's no surprise that 45% of Americans say that their phone is the most valuable possession they have. If Satan can't make you bad, he will make you busy. He will do anything to distract you from your mission. Luke 9:57 through 62. As they were walking along the road, a man said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus replied, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He said to another man, follow me. But he replied, Lord, first let me go bury my father. Jesus said, still another said, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family. Jesus replied, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. From this passage, Jesus identifies and calls out 3 distraction missions that will pull you away from the mission Jesus has made for you. First, the mission of comfort. A man walks up ready to follow, and Jesus says that the mission may lead to homelessness. We don't hear how the person responds, but it's heavily implied that this was a deal breaker. He was interested in following Jesus as long as it didn't take him out of his comfort zone. Just think about it. All the things Jesus had his disciples do, he sent them out for weeks at a time with no cash, extra clothes, or fallback plan. Ultimately, Jesus would model this life by dying on the cross through 6 hours of excruciating pain and torture. What happens when the mission of comfort comes in conflict with the mission of Jesus? What happens when comfort becomes a bigger deal in your life than Christ? We learned here that Jesus says it would be better to count the cost before following him. Here is the second distraction: the mission of commitments. Jesus turns to another person and initiates the conversation. He says, "Follow me." But the man replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus says back to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead, but you can go and proclaim the kingdom of God." At first, this seems like a pretty harsh response from Jesus. Don't you picture a dad on his deathbed and Jesus tells the son to leave him there alone and follow? Who would say that to someone? Think about this. If his father had already died, the man would have been occupied with the burial. But he wanted to wait until after his father's death, which might have been years. There's an urgency to the mission that he's called us to. It's not something we pick up when our schedule finally has some breathing room, but instead becomes our first priority immediately. The man says these words, and they make all the difference. Lord, first let me. There wasn't anything wrong with what he wanted to take care of. He wanted to take care of his father. The problem was putting this as a priority over following Jesus. Instead, he needed to say, "First, Lord, whatever you're calling me to, I'll do first." This is not just for the sake of being obedient, it's also for our own blessing. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says famous words, "Seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." Jesus promises that if we place his kingdom first in our lives, then he'll take care of all the other stuff, all the other things we love to stress out about. So, are there any things that you have told Jesus, yes, but first? The third distraction, the mission of competition. As Jesus continues to walk, another man approaches. "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me go back and say goodbye to my family." Jesus turns to him and replies, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God." Once again, a seemingly harsh response from Jesus, right? But understand this, Jesus sees through what we say. He knows our heart. He knows what we're about. And notice once again that this man has some of the same words, "Lord, but first." There's absolutely nothing wrong with telling your family where you're going. But notice in the same sentence that he is informing Jesus that he will follow him. He's also giving Jesus a command. "Jesus, you let me go and do this, or I won't follow you." What if this was simply just a matter of humility? What if he responded, "Jesus, I will follow you. Would it be all right?" if I went and said goodbye to my family and told them where I was going? Instead, he tries to make a deal with Jesus and places a condition on his willingness to follow him. The mission God calls us to must be seen as a reward and not a regret. He wants you to step forward into his calling, his confidence, and joy. Many things in our lives compete with God's mission. Do any of these things ever compete with what God's mission of resolutely walking with him no matter what the cost? Last week we learned that if you're a follower of Jesus, then you're called by him. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll actually live out your calling. Just like Jesus resolutely walked towards Jerusalem, even though he knew what was ahead, so we must too, intentionally and resolutely follow Jesus in his mission above all else. Jesus is not about creating a following. He is about making followers. The primary characteristic he is looking for in his followers is humility. Will I lay down my own comforts, other commitments, and the things that compete for my time, treasure, and talents to resolutely follow Jesus? God, do I have any distracting missions in my life that need to die today? Are there any comforts that you have made more important than Christ? Are there any other commitments that you've been saying, but first, before you can fully follow Christ's call on your life?